Hey everyone, what's going on? It's Nerfa here. So in the latest patch of Planet Coaster, we finally got the friction slider, which is a big change because a lot of us do know that the friction in the older versions of Planet Coaster was a little off, and so it's nice that they finally added it. The big downfall to me is that it's not an input value, that it's simply a slider. So with the way friction works, like for example, when I use testing, I use a program called FVD++. I'll go a little more into detail what that is later. But you can put in a frictional coefficient that will alter the friction that is applied on the coaster. In Planet Coaster, we have a slider, so there's a coefficient that's unknown, and by us changing the slider, we're just changing that value based on the multiplier, which will then change the friction in turn. So if you're new to this update and you don't know how to get to friction, you go into the settings, go to gameplay settings, click on game, coaster friction controls, make sure that you have this enabled. By default, it's disabled, so if you first get on, you might not see the friction slider, but once you enable it, click that, apply, okay, and you're all good. And I'm going to bring up, I'm going to use this coaster for some explanations. So this coaster, I made this was my floorless that I made finished it about a week or two ago, probably about 2 weeks, and I plan on custom supporting it. But now that we have the frictional slider, and using the value that I came up with, the ride no longer works. And there's a main streamer I watch, Blind IRL. If you haven't heard of Blind IRL, I'll put a link in the description. Great guy, check him out. And he does schematics workshop spotlights every week, or not every week, every 2 weeks. So if you have any coasters that you love and you want to submit so that other people can judge and see them, and then I will give you the link to that. But anyways, past that, just want to give Blind a shout out because he's always been an inspiration for this game, and usually watching him play gets me back into it. So moving on, as you can see with 1.0, with the friction multiplier at 1, you can see it goes to the ride just fine. But most people might not understand, but the friction in this game it's not high enough. And what I'm talking about is, generally, if you looked at a coaster in real life, you would see that each hill is smaller and smaller, and that's because of friction. With friction, as the coaster moves along the track, it's slowed down by the force of friction. But as you can see in this ride kind of here, a good indication that the friction in Planet Coaster is wrong is that the lift hill is this high. This next element is this high, which, that should make it fine. This next element is a little higher than this one and almost as tall as the lift hill. It still makes it to the 0G roll fine. Our next element is almost the same height, makes it through fine. The next element is almost the same height, and it still makes that too. So when riding it, you kind of almost feel that the coaster is not slowing down enough like it should be, which can give some unrealistic results. But when I made this coaster, I didn't want the coaster to be flying through these elements, so I made them at the height they are for that reason. So, but if I change it to the friction to the value that I calculated, which in a little bit I will go over how I got those values. If I change it to 1.6, you'll see, I believe that it stops on that right there. Go ahead and ride it. It just barely cruises past that. And yeah, since it barely went past that right here, I believe it just stops right here. Yeah. So you can see as I applied a more realistic friction to it, it no longer makes it. So unfortunately, I'm just going to cancel this project altogether. I might do something similar, but that's the whole point in the friction. So when it comes to friction, I made a spreadsheet with all the values for the different coasters I have. One thing I want to make an important note about these friction multiplier values is it's based on so many cars in a train. If you don't know, mass affects friction. So if I give you the value of 1.5 for a flying coaster, and it says 8 cars, if you put 1 car in 1.5 friction multiplier, you're not going to get a result you want. But for, standard coasters, the cars that I've listed are the cars that would be used in the actual ride itself. So, for example, if you, for whatever reason, you want to have a flying coaster with, like, say, 3 or 4 cars instead of the 8, then you would not use the full 1.5 friction, because these values are based on the train has 8 cars and it's weighing a certain amount. And since it's not weighing that certain amount, the friction isn't as heavy and the result won't be as good. And then, so for almost every ride in the game, you'll see that the friction multiplier goes up, except for 2, which that would be the GCI, which, point that out real quick. I think it's called the Gnarler in Planet Coaster. Yes, this one right here, which usually normal ones will have 12 cars. This one, the value goes lower than 1. And also, it says gravity group, the 6-seat ones. When I'm talking about that, I mean the wooden, which is the monster. The reason for this is going back to mass earlier, how I told you that mass does play an effect to the friction. The wooden cars weigh a lot less than something like the Intamin cars on the Giga track. For example, this with the 8 cars weighs almost around 2,600 kilograms, and something like the Gnarler is only weighing about 1,200. So the mass difference does make a difference. And then also, this is a steel track, and the wheels on these steel coasters are a little different than the wooden, so the friction plays a little different in that part. And from other people I've talked to, in my personal opinion, the wooden coaster, it slows down too fast so that's why I adjusted that friction value earlier. All right, so now to get on with how I calculated these values. Most people are kind of probably confused, like, maybe did you get to take a random guess? Actually, I did a lot of research, and not really a lot of research, but a lot of messing around with something called FED++, which I mentioned that earlier. FED++, for anyone that doesn't know, it's a physics program or physics model kind of program for roller coaster building. And how in Planet Coaster, if I want to, mess with the track, I just simply go ahead and I just grab this, move it around, make it how I want, change the roll if I want, that kind of thing. When it comes to FED++, you adjust the G-forces, and that will curve the track or shape the track however you would like it. So that, because a track at 4.5 Gs will look completely different based on the speed, and since the program knows the speed, it can accurately represent that. And a lot of people use that when they're making rides for No Limits too. That's what I personally use whenever I use No Limits all the time, was FED. But the way I did it is, for example, I would make a floorless coaster that just drops, and then at the bottom there would be a long straight section. And what I would do is I would go into FED, and I would make a floorless coaster, and since I have a little more freedom in there, I would make a long straight section in there. And the friction values in FED are very reliable. There's a whole formula. If anyone wants it, I can post the form link for it, but there's a whole formula for the way they calculated friction. But so I took a long straight section, and in Planet Coaster it was around 180 something feet. And then since I can change the values in FED, I made that track length the exact same. And so I checked the speed at the start of the track, or the long section, I checked the speed at the end. And so what I would do in Planet Coaster is see that, I start at 50 miles per hour, and after so long I'm at 45. But then in FED, I'm like, after that long distance, I'm at 42 miles per hour. So to me, that's, hey, you need to up the friction because it's not slowing down properly with the friction force. And then I repeated that with anything that's on my list. or my spreadsheet. I didn't do loopy turns because it doesn't have a frictional value in FED, but I would imagine it's the same thing as the Gerstlauer Eurofighter. And then with the RMC, Miller's 2 doesn't have RMC and FED doesn't have the values, so for now I don't know any idea of what the multiplier would be. I would imagine it would be a little more than 1 because the trains are going to be a little heavier. But like I'm saying, the mass isn't the only thing that matters. There's a lot more factors in that. But RMC, I would say it's probably above 1 because they do seem a little fast in this game. But without more proper research into RMC, then I'm not going to be able to figure it out. But all the other rides that I'm testing, I had frictional values for and FED. So moving on, going to if looking on my spreadsheet, I have the B&M dive coaster and the wing rider, and you'll notice that for both of those I have a 1.9 frictional value. You would want to think that if all the other B&M rides like the invert and the floorless and the sit down, all of those have the same friction value, why don't these two? Big thing, if you've ever seen a POV or rode a floorless or wing rider coaster, you notice they slow down a lot faster than compared to other rides. And the big thing about like the floorless, as you can, wherever the train's at, the train, it doesn't go far off the track, so it's a lot more aerodynamic. But when you have a wing rider or floorless, with the coaster being so much more wider, the air resistance is greater. And Planet Coaster doesn't factor in air resistance, so that's not a thing. That's why I added extra to the friction multiplier. It's not the trains don't weigh more. The trains actually will weigh less on a dive coaster than like a floorless. It's just the wider coaster car makes for more air resistance, and therefore the ride slows down a lot faster compared to other ones. And then like the Intamin wing, that doesn't apply because the ride is barely off the track. Alright, and some more testing methods I did to back up my research. I made, since after that long stretch that I said that I made earlier in both Planet Coaster and FED, I would make a hill and then have it flatten out the top, and I would check the speed at the flatten. And that's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty close, and the way I did it is because in Planet Coaster I can go to testing, I can see the heat map, and I can see the G-forces. When it comes to FED, the entire way to make the coaster is using G-forces, and I know the track length for Planet Coaster, so I can replicate almost the entire thing. And that was also to check not just a straight track, since that's not a very reliable research method, so I wanted to factor in a couple other things, and that's what made me come up with some of these particular values. Alright, and that's, to be honest, that's about all I got for this video. If you have any questions, if I didn't explain something right, or you're confused about anything regarding the friction in Planet Coaster, just leave a comment. Feel free to PM me on Twitch, or you can find me on Discord, or, there's many ways you can contact me. But if you have any questions or need help with anything, just feel free to let me know. And thanks for watching.